Greetings. Guess it's time for another story. A few weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago, I put a story and a bunch of pictures I took in the 1970s while I was in New Zealand. And I was going through my stuff and I found a whole bunch of other pictures. And of different areas and different people and different things we saw. So I thought I'll make a second story here about the same area, but I'll be using different subjects and different pictures. So these pictures were taken in the mid-70s, and that was kind of an interesting place when I went to visit New Zealand. Anyway, if you didn't see the first video, it's on my channel, and this will be the second one, but a lot of this is just going to be pictures and narration. Kind of what we saw, what we did, what I thought about the place, and so forth. So come along. Let's see what I found. Milford Sound in New Zealand, South Island, west side. I guess they call it Westland. Anyway, this picture was taken in early spring. Look at those flowers. What's amazing about this place is that you're at sea level. That's salt water out there. And that peak in the middle of the picture is Mitre Peak. And I think it's 5,400 feet tall. Just to give you an idea of the scale of this place. In the same area is this beautiful little stream. I think this is called the Hollyford River. Over the years, lots of different fish have been brought to New Zealand. They brought brown trout, rainbow trout. They tried Atlantic salmon. I don't think they did well. But they've been bringing in, at the time that I was there, in the mid-1970s, they were bringing in and getting returns of king and coho salmon. So I believe there was a very large run of coho or silver salmon coming up this river here. I spent some time up towards Mt.Cook. This is the Tasman Glacier. I think it's 14 miles long. But anyway, you can see the road down below that you can drive, I think 8 or 10 miles length of the glacier. Full of rock and ice and real interesting. I took off a couple of times and went high up in the mountains up here above the glacier. This is one of the pictures I took. Here the glacier's coming down again. One is the Tasman, and I can't remember what the name of the other was. And way up towards Mt.Cook. I think that's Mt.Cook off to our right up high. I'm not sure. Mt.Cook is, I believe, over 14,000 feet tall. I could be wrong, but I think it is. One of the New Zealanders I met, this is Maury. I think he was originally from Scotland. He was Scottish anyway. I kind of like his hat band, a piece of rubber tire. At the time in the 1970s, they could buy fishing rods and so forth, but it was difficult for them to find things like boots. So he's wearing a pair of real rubber farm boots, hip boots, and catching rainbow in one of the lakes and streams in the area that come off Mt.Cook. Anyway, we spent quite a bit of time fly fishing with Maury. And I flew around the South Island of New Zealand with, I guess it's Mountain Airlines New Zealand. I don't even know if it still exists anymore. Like I said, this is from back in 76. Here's my friend Don Fraser. And I think we're fishing the Makarora River. And that could be Mount Aspring in the background. I'm not sure. Anyway, we were up on the Makarora and the Wilkin and a few other interesting places. Don, he was 75 and I was 25, so we were an interesting team. Here's old Don and Maury checking out a small lake for brown trout. I don't know the year of that Land Rover, but that was one incredible vehicle. See, from 1970, probably a 1960s some model. But man, those things were tough, and he took us off-road and along hillsides that were so steep, it scared me. Here's one of the glaciated peaks up towards Mt.Cook. A lot of ice and glaciers in New Zealand. The place really fascinated me. I saw lots of beautiful flowers over there I'd never seen before. I don't know what this is, but it was sure gorgeous. It's along one of these high mountain lakes that Maury took us to. Here's Don and Maury again in the Land Rover. We were somewhere east of Arthur's Pass, maybe kind of northeast up in the mountains. Kind of the dry area of New Zealand. We were on the west side, westland they call it, or the wetlands. Over on the the wet side, I think they get 200, 300 inches of rain a year. Anyway, all these small little creeks and all these little ponds up there, they all have brown trout or rainbow trout that have been planted in the past and eventually became wild fish. Here I am, about age 25, and I'm wearing my New Zealand farm jersey. The first thing I did when I got to New Zealand was buy all New Zealand clothes, pants and shirts, and had the same shoes, but they could spot I was a Yank right away as soon as I opened my mouth. Here's the Hast River. We drove up the Hast River, and I think you go over Hast Pass, and you drop down into Jackson. I think it's called Jackson Bay. Anyway, there was a neat little town over there we stayed at for a while called Hokitika. It was really cool. I really liked that little town right on the coast. We always stopped and fly fished. Sometimes we'd keep a nice fish like this big rainbow. Look how fat that thing is. Little bitty head and tail and great big body. Typical big New Zealand trout. Here's another one of those high alpine lakes. I don't know the name of this one. Can't remember where it was. New Zealand's famous for its sheep, and I never saw too many cattle there. This is more over towards the wetter westland area of New Zealand. Anyway, there's a big old white face out there, so somebody's eating beef. I saw, quite a few dairy cows, because there's a big dairy industry there, but not many beef cattle. Well, this is over in Queensland. I think this is actually on the edge of town, next to one of the big lakes. There's a name for those mountains back there. I keep thinking, I can't remember the name of them. They're pretty impressive right there in Queenstown. Oh, you might notice there in the front of the picture there is it says honesty box, 50 cents. Now this is what really impressed me about New Zealand. Well, the first thing is there's no private property around any lake or stream. That was the first thing I noticed, and hey, this is great, So anyway, we'd be driving around from small town to small town, and there'd be these little fruit stands, I guess you would call them. And you go over to the fruit stand, and there'd be all kinds of fresh fruits and vegetables for sale. But there'd be nobody around. And there'd be an open cardboard box just full of money, just sitting there, and a sign that says, "Make your own change." Now, that's something you can't do in the U.S., not even in the 1970s, because somebody come along and just take all that money. But that's how the system worked over there. It was really neat. You just
made your own change and took the vegetables and fruit you wanted based on the price on the board, and away you went. I wish it was that way here in America. The other side of the New Zealand, the drier side ocean, I think that's the side facing kind of out in the Pacific. It's more like California and Oregon, Northern California and Oregon. Lots of beautiful little bays and things, but unlike California and Oregon coast, there's hardly anybody around. It's just amazing, all this beautiful land they have. All around the area you see these big sheds, and the sheep ranchers would get together and they'd muster all their sheep together. And they'd come to these sheds, and there are professional guys that shear the sheep, and they even have contests and stuff, who's the best sheep shearer. But you find these sheds, they're all pretty much all look the same. They got little spots out there to put the sheep in, and they're usually metal buildings, and about the only time they're ever used is when they're shearing sheep. I love the old churches over there in New Zealand. Most of them are Anglican churches, Church of England, I guess, Presbyterian and a few others. But what was neat is they built everything out of this rock, and everything was built to last. It's really kind of a cute building, but yeah, they built more out of rock and stone than they did wood. And here's a rough old bush pilot that I met, flew with for a while. Believe it or not, he's from Alaska. So the story is that in the early 70s, he and his friend up in Alaska each had bush planes, and they decided to relocate to New Zealand. Unfortunately, his partner got lost and was never seen again flying across the Pacific. I'm not sure what direction, how they came down, probably down through the Aleutians and maybe Japan and that way, I don't know. It'd be an awful long flight when those planes cross the Pacific. I don't think they could do it. But anyway, his partner didn't make it, but he did, and he's now a New Zealand, at that time, bush pilot, and I flew around with him a little bit. This is Arthur's Pass. Those red kind of like bushes in the foreground, they're actually pretty tall trees, like 30, 40 feet, maybe taller. And they bloom. Of course, you know, the seasons are reversed down in New Zealand, so Christmas is summertime down there. And these trees, I think they called them the New Zealand Christmas trees. I'm not sure. But anyway, they told me that they bloomed around Christmas time here in New Zealand. I visited a number of the big glaciers on the west side of New Zealand. There was the Franz Josef and I think the Fox Glacier you could drive to. This is one of the trails where there's a hanging bridge over the river. It comes out from under the ice. Kind of a cool thing. What amazed me about New Zealand too was the miles and miles and miles and endless miles of ocean beach, and no one living along the side of it, and hardly ever saw a person. There'd be a pull-off or something like a small picnic table or whatever, but then you'd have to hike the beach. But it was just gorgeous. I can't believe it. It'd be like being the first person to be to Big Sur, California, you know. Nobody else around. You're the only one. That's the way it was here. I just loved it. Well, here's old Don that I traveled with, our rental car. He's taking a picture of the Tasman Glacier out there. We're at the end of the road. I don't know how. I think it was 8 or 10 miles that road went up the glacier. But I know that glacier is at least 14 miles long and thousands of feet thick. Here's another picture I took way up on the slopes of one of the mountains. Climbing around, looking. New Zealand have chamois, or shamu, I can't remember how you're going to pronounce it, but it's originally from the Alps. chamois. And I was really interested in seeing what they call as a tar. I think it's TSAR. It's another mountain goat type critter. I think they brought it over from the Himalayas and brought them to New Zealand. But yeah, I climbed around to see if I could find one or spot one. But all I spotted were deer, which there are lots of deer. Here's the scene. Another valley heads up towards Mt.Cook, and there's a big lodge up there called the Hermitage. It's very kind of a big fancy looking place with great views. Here's Tasman Glacier again. Nothing but a big conveyor belt moving rock and debris. If you look real closely there, you can see the blue ice underneath the rock. Yeah, another picture I took when I was scrambling around the mountains. Here's another view of all the ocean beaches. This is down by a small town called Dunedin. And Don and I, we stopped there at a car dealership, and we were looking at their pickup trucks and other things, and we were amazed. At the time in the U.S., you could buy a nice car and a pickup truck, top of the line for about $4,000 or $5,000. And we looked around, and it was $15,000 to $20,000 for the same vehicle in New Zealand. And there wasn't a car around, new one, that looked like it was less than $15,000. So we talked to the guy for a while, and he said, "Hey, you guys are Yanks." And we said, "Yeah, and we're looking at your cars, and we're shocked by your prices." And he says, "Well, that's the world price." We said, "What?" "Yes, that is the world price of those vehicles." He said, "We've been told that pretty soon you people in the U.S. are going to have to pay $15,000, $20,000 for your vehicle, because you're going to be paying the world price too." It wasn't more than about 2-3 years later, and we were paying those horrible prices. So there's something going on when people can decide the world price. Another view of the Tasman Glacier, or one of the other glaciers, I'm not sure. I visited 2 or 3 different ones. In the areas where the glaciers have receded, and you've got these big floodplains where the rivers that come out from the glacier, they eventually flatten everything out. You can always tell. You can also tell by the lines along the side of the mountains. You can see the marks of the glacier in different places. This is another big valley heading up towards Mt.Cook. You can see I took lots of pictures of the ocean beaches and the oceans. I'm just utterly amazed at no people. I couldn't believe it. There were houses built all over the place. But in New Zealand, they wouldn't, at the time, they would not let anyone build next to a river or a creek or next to a lake of any kind. You had to build back from it. And they told me, they said, I can go through any sheep gate, I can go anywhere I want if I'm heading to a river, stream, or a lake somewhere. And I did. We just took off across fields, but down there they called them paddocks, and we just go through gates, and as long as you shut the gate behind you, just kept on going, and we'd end up on some little stream somewhere on some big farm ranch, but they couldn't keep you off of it. I kind of love that. It's too bad the United States didn't do that. Now all that stuff belongs to the rich people only. The rest of us, we can't even go there anymore. I saw so few cows in the country that every time I saw a whitefish out there, I took its picture. Here's a view down into the glaciated lakes, and where a glacier had been here at one time and receded. You can see where dug out, flattened out, and then the stream starts digging a channel below it. And the trees and the brush come in. Another glacier. I saw a lot of glaciers. Throughout the South Island of New Zealand, I saw a lot of these old cars. You know, it was kind of like, you know, years ago, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, you'd find old cars on old farms and ranches and, you know, in Idaho and Wyoming and Montana and different places. People would got them and restored them, but there was still a lot of old cars like this. I think this is an old English car of some kind. I don't know if it runs or not, but there were sure a lot of them parked around the old farms and sheep ranches. Here's a picture as we're flying around the higher areas of the Southern Alps, flying with the bush pilot. There were so many small alpine valleys. You know, when you went over the mountain passes, and there'd be these little roads go back a little ways and take you back into these beautiful little valleys and places. Sometimes you'd find sheep in there. People would bring their sheep up for summer range. But yeah, it's a pretty impressive country. Here's another high valley. Kind of looks, well, the Southern Alps are pretty impressive, and I don't think there's anything like them. I've never seen mountains in Alaska or Washington or Oregon quite like these. I've never been to the Alps in Europe, so maybe they're similar. Here's Milford Sound again, where I took the first picture with the flowers. This is low tide. You can see the slime and the seaweed on the rocks. Old trees and things out there that have been blown in. That one side of New Zealand, I think it's the Pacific facing side away from Australia. It's really rough. You know, it's called fjord land in places. And it's so rough that there were areas that they would not let people in. And the reason is it was so dangerous to go up in those mountains that they didn't want to rescue them. So they just closed off some of the more dangerous places. But yeah, about 300 inches of rain a year, kind of like where I live now here in southeast Alaska. But of course, we don't have peaks like that raising up from salt water. It's at 5,400 and some feet. This is some old bridge. I don't even know if it's there anymore. I'm not quite sure what river it's over. It could be over the Shotover, because we did go over by the Shotover River. That yellow stuff in the front, that's gorst. It's got thistles and real sharp spikes on it, and it has a yellow flower. But they're the same thing that the Normandy hedgerows are made out of in northern France, and also up in England, Scotland. They had transplanted it, and then they transplanted it here because they used it to make hedges instead of fences to keep sheep in. It's got so many prickles on it that once you build a hedge of this stuff, nothing's going to go through it. I mean, it's nasty stuff. Here's a valley up above Queenstown, I believe. That area down there on the right, there's a little short mountain and a few other little hills off to the right there. That's where they filmed a lot of Lord of the Rings movies, I guess. We're down in there. But this was long before then. This is about 1976. Another picture I took while I was flying around as a passenger with the bush pilot. I can't remember his name. A lot of people I can't remember anymore. It's frustrating. You sure see the lines along the glacier there. The Ice was a little deeper and thicker at one time. These are lupin. I don't know if they grew wild in New Zealand or if someone brought the seeds over. But anyway, I took seeds from these plants and I took them home. I planted them in my garden and they came up just like this. Oh, it wasn't only seeds that I broke the law with. I'm a smuggler, I guess. Anyway, Don, the old guy I fished and hunted with, he was a lapidariist, I guess, is someone who cuts and polishes and stone and makes jewelry out of it. Well, New Zealand is famous for its jade, and they call it greenstone. Don says, well, I'd like to get some greenstone, you know. He couldn't cut any of it, but he says, I'd like to get some slabs of it. So we went around to different places, and they said, no, we can only sell you the earrings and the medallions made out of the jade. We can't sell you the raw material. So he says, yeah, anyway, he says you can't take it out of the country. So anyway, we eventually talked a guy into cutting some really thin pieces of greenstone, or jade. And Don gave him quite a bit of money for it. Probably more than it was worth, but we talked the guy into giving it to us. We didn't tell him what we were going to do with it. Anyway, Don and I stuck that sheets of greenstone inside our shoes when we left New Zealand. So essentially, we smuggled it out. Anyway, that was back in 1976. I don't think they'll come after me now. Another one of the glaciers and valleys. You can see where once the streams start coming out of them glaciers, they start moving that rock too and flattening it all out. That's what made flat plains and eventually farmland down below many, many, many years ago. Here's Don and Maury again. Don's looking at petrified wood. There's all kinds of interesting petrified wood and other things, and fossils too.
You know, while I was watching looking around the ocean beaches and stuff there in New Zealand, I think it's on the Christchurch side, which would be what? East, I guess. Walking some of the ocean beaches and picking up some of the shells. I was amazed. There was a long tubular, what size my finger, shell. Kind of like a horn. You know, narrow, got bigger, fatter. About the same size as my finger too. Okay, I'm not going to use that other finger. Anyway, I was curious and picked a few up. Decided to bring them home. And when we were up into, I think it's called the Central Ontario or something, it's around Wanaka. We're about 50 miles from the ocean, and we went up I believe it was the Waitaki River, I'm not sure, but we took off on a place that was called Deep Creek, and Maury took us up there in his Land Rover. I mean, we're going along, you know, like it's incredible vehicles, those things. Anyway, we got back up in there, and we were looking at the rocks and so forth, because of course Don, he cut rocks, made jewelry and stuff. We were digging around, and I found this whole ridge, and I went over and looked at it, and it was solid. Now wait a minute, we were 50 miles from the ocean and at almost 2,000 feet elevation in the Southern Alps. But here's this ridge I found, and it is solid. Those little shells, these tubular shells, you can dig them out of the side of the mountain, out of the side of the ridge. And what really baffled me, they weren't petrified. They looked just like the ones I found down on the ocean. And how they got there, I don't know, but I still wish I had those shells. I don't anymore. I can't remember what I did with them. But if you've ever, been to New Zealand and walked on those beaches, you'll see hundreds and thousands of those things shaped about like my finger. But how they got 50 miles from the ocean up in the mountains, I don't know. Yeah, really appreciate you. Oh, look at that tree attacking me. I really appreciate you watching my videos, and plenty more on my YouTube site. I got more stories coming. I was looking, I've got hundreds, maybe thousands more pictures. I've got a lot of old video I can bring back up, and that I took in the last 25 years and redo some of it and make stories out of it. So I thank you and appreciate you watching, and till next time, we'll catch you later.